Good morning and welcome back, everyone. We are here at Rochester Institute of Technology with President Munson, and we are going to be discussing innovation in the higher ed space. There has been a tremendous amount of discussion about education across the lifetime, and certainly we are oftentimes focused on K-12. Sometimes we talk about early childhood education, but today we're going to focus at that higher ed space and beyond, because higher ed is starting to go through an evolution and recognize that as we have to be globally competitive, as jobs are going to be changing over the lifetime, we're going to see people continuing to circle back to this space in a variety of different ways. So President Munson, would you please give us a little bit of your background so we can understand where you're coming from into your current position?
Well, I guess I'll start with early childhood. As a youngster, I grew up just fascinated with science and with math and the outdoors. I kind of grew up in the woods for a big part of my childhood, just playing in the woods and visiting all the national parks and what have you. I was fortunate to have a mother and father that wanted our family to do that. But then later on, I would say, kind of getting into high school age, I and others in my family, it seemed like we did two things. We did music and math. And there are a lot of brains that work that way. And in my case, I got into college at the University of Delaware and didn't know exactly what I wanted to study, but I figured I would study something related to math and science. And I took a couple of years to decide. Eventually chose electrical engineering, partly because I thought that would be the least limiting. So I would be able to study electrical engineering and still go toward more the scientific side or the mathematical side, and ended up then pursuing a PhD at Princeton in electrical engineering, and then teaching at the University of Illinois, as I refer to it, as a regular professor of electrical and computer engineering, minding my own business for 24 years. Was repeatedly asked to think about administrative positions, but declined those for the most part until I eventually moved to the University of Michigan, where I was chair of electrical engineering and computer science. That's a combined department there. And did that for 3 years, and then became dean of engineering for 10 years, and took a year off to think about what next, and then decided to move to the Rochester Institute of Technology, which really combines a lot of my passions in technology and the arts.
And so, was it the combination that drew you here?
It really was the combination, and no offense to those technical schools out there that are purely technical, but the reason I came to RIT was because it's also strong in the arts.
And what is it particularly about the arts that matters in higher ed?
I think a couple of things. One is that there are so many people who are multi-talented and want to do more than one thing. And oftentimes the talent on one side is in some standard discipline. It might be science or math related or computer science related. And the other very often is in the performing arts side, and sometimes in the studio arts side. And there really isn't a university in the nation that I think caters to people that want to do both of those things at an almost equal level. And I see RIT as a place where we can do that. But another aspect of this is just the overall importance of the arts, I think, and integrating those throughout higher ed. So one of the things I had the privilege to do when I was at the University of Michigan was work with all of the arts-related deans at the University of Michigan to create a nationwide organization called the Alliance for the Arts and Research Universities. And the organization has somewhere close to 50 members now. RIT is one of the newer members, but other members include MIT and Stanford and, of course, Michigan, where it originated. And the notion there is that the arts are more than just something to kind of look at or something to do on a Saturday afternoon or something to listen to. But very often, for a lot of people, they're fully integrated throughout your life. And within a university, they ought to be integrated into the research mission and educational mission. And the arts shouldn't be just standalone conservatories. I mean, it's fine that we have such things, but in a university like this one, we don't intend to have a standalone conservatory for music or for painting or whatever. Instead, we expect to have that fully integrated throughout the university and to attract a student then that wants to do both sides. I had an experience, this is some years ago when I was active in musical theater, and it hit me right before the show was to go on, so to speak. This is the dress rehearsal, and in musical theater, usually a dress rehearsal is a bit of a disaster. But somebody's got to pull all this together, and somehow the very next night it's all going to be essentially perfect. And the person, yeah, that's right. The person who is critical to this has the job of stage manager. The stage manager in a musical theater production has information and knowledge about every aspect of that production. And so it might be the mics and the audio and the lighting and the blocking on the stage and the sets and everything else. And they are the ones that are making magic happen because they understand the whole system. And when I saw what that person did, all I could think of was a systems engineer in engineering. Suppose you're working for a company like Hughes Aircraft, and they're designing a new satellite communication system. And you've got to worry about the design of the satellite. You've got to launch it. It's got to function later on. And it's so, so complicated. Who does that job? Well, they're called a systems engineer. And a systems engineer and a stage manager in musical theater, they don't know this, but they have the same job. And when you think about that, I think there's a lot on the arts side and a lot on the technology side that actually overlay one another. And we ought to talk about that.
I couldn't agree more. And what my head goes to is we talk a lot about, I have a phrase I say, automation is coming. How are we preparing? And as I think about automation, and we did a lot of this work in government, looking at what do we need our people to be ready to do in the future? And creativity, hands down, was one of the big areas that we looked at, recognizing exactly, to your point, that being able to do a single task or being able to do something that was repetitive was likely going to be influenced at minimum by automation and maybe even eradicated. But these human pieces of these meta skills, having multiple skill sets, understanding the creative process, that systems approach, that's not going to be so easily.
No, somebody still has to design the system.
Yeah. And so.
And automation is part of the system.
Yes, it will be. But it also means a necessity to have some evolution in education in order to be able to support that. We have not traditionally looked at arts education as a required space. Right? We worry about our reading and our math and our writing, and then
it's a nice to have.
It's a nice to have.
Right.
And yet, the way you're describing it, and I would fully agree, it's starting to sound like a necessity.
Well, I think it is, and it's especially for a large segment of the population. You know, people have different interests, and there's probably no single recipe for every student that wants to come to college and study. But I think for a big segment, this just makes so much sense.
And how does that play into a lot of the innovation initiatives that you have here at the university?
Well, we're going to be using, I don't want to give away too many of our secrets, but we have a lot of plans in the arts and especially the performing arts. And we expect to be a magnet for students that want to undertake studies, say, in computer science or mechanical engineering, plus have very serious experiences in the arts. And who knows, after they graduate, they may decide to go the arts route rather than the technology or science route. So we have a whole host of initiatives underway. They're kind of under wraps right now.
Wow.
But I think pretty soon I'll be able to talk about them more.
Well, I'm excited already.
And this is a competitive field.
Well, it is. And ironically, just personally, I have a child who's a cybersecurity guru, and then I have a child who is at Manhattan School of Music. So he is a high-level musician.
Yes.
And we talk frequently how their skills overlap. And also, it's fascinating to watch the two of them speak to each other because they share that creative technology space very nicely, even though they're both very highly specialized in their two areas. So it just resonates substantially. So I look forward to hearing more about that.
Well, it takes a similar mind, actually, to do both sides, because on the engineering side, somebody has to have ideas and design. And on the music side, somebody has to compose and improvise. And then also there is a lot of work on the engineering side that has to do with refinement, taking something that already exists and making it a little bit different for a different application, and just refining it, making it better, better, and better. Well, guess what? That's what lots of musicians spend so many hours practicing at, right? So there's a complete parallel.
Yeah, I would agree. Now translate this a little bit to global competitiveness. We're hearing a lot about that, right? And so one of the things we talk about in defense actually was this recognition that the whole defense space is actually changing substantially. Maybe not the nature of war, but the way that we have to bring teams together, the way that we are always going to be global partnerships. A lot of folks don't realize we do not do single nation activities anymore. And the reason those changes are coming in defense is because we're seeing that individuals with fewer resources in countries that are smaller are actually now empowered by all of the technology to be able to compete at a much higher level than has been the case in the past. Secondly, they're able to get access in ways they weren't in the past. We bring that over to the business side. We see a similar concept, right? Almost everybody has ordered something online that has come from another nation, or they've answered a phone call for help, and they're able to access from another country.
And I would also say a lot of the threats in the defense sector have changed. So building that multi-billion-dollar whatever is not necessarily going to protect you from the latest threat.
Correct. And so we are definitely looking at different models. It means that defense readiness is being kind of redefined, or at least expanded. And so immediately we start looking at education, because in order to have eligibility to come into defense, in order to be globally competitive, whether it's in business or in the defense space, same thing, we've got to have creative problem solvers. We have to have individuals who can do things that a computer can't. And we've got to have that agility, and to your point, not just focused on having the largest either weapon or force, but having the most capable. So when you look at how higher ed is evolving, how is it that you bring some of those concepts into the university space to ensure that the students that are coming here, but I know also connected to other universities, we as a nation are looking forward to making sure that our people are competitive with those jobs that are coming and changing?
Yeah, well, to your point, I think that in most any country, even including countries that are still developing, they're going to be able to offer, say, basic degrees in mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, computer science, physics, or whatever. And the students will certainly receive the quote, book learning, and they will undertake the standard educational labs. They'll work in their educational labs in the curriculum. But what I think we need to do more of in the U.S., and we're heading that way pretty fast, is more in the way of experiential learning, where our students end up working on open-ended problems, where they become designers and they become originators. And what I observed at Michigan, and now it's a continuation here at RIT, is our better students are probably receiving more than half of their education outside of the standard curriculum, outside of the coursework. And so this involves work on big multidisciplinary student project teams. It involves entrepreneurship. It involves having international experiences, so you develop more of a global mindset. It involves a lot of development of leadership, and some of that comes through or occurs when one is involved with these big multidisciplinary design teams, but also just student groups, societies, the student government, or whatever. Go out there and learn how to lead something. And a lot of those things, I think we still do and will do better in the U.S. than in a lot of other countries. But they'll catch on to that too. And I think part of this is riding the wave, staying one step ahead. But for us now, this can be a big step ahead of some of the competition.
Yeah, I like that. And interesting, one of the comments that was commonly made at NATO by other nations was, we look to the U.S. for innovation. We look to the U.S. for the next idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's pretty amazing to see it from that perspective, and recognize that we are, I like to use the term thought leader. There are leaders who are individuals that can get anybody to follow them. They're also leaders that can create those new ideas and those new pathways. And I think we need both. And it sounds like here you're creating those thought leaders, but probably the other as well.
I think we're working hard on that, and we're looking for incoming students that want to become that kind of person. I think it's also important to say that at least up until now, the style of government that we have in this country and the mindset of the population has been very conducive to this model of originating new ideas and wanting to do new things and not staying too traditional. If you get too locked in, too tightly controlled, and less free thinking, then we will fall behind. And we have to have this kind of explorer mindset and just be curious about everything. And I think our society certainly has done, within the U.S., has done a good job of promoting that mindset.
I'll agree and challenge. So I completely agree that's where we've been. I think the addition of social media, and certainly we ran into this, or you're hearing this discussion everywhere, right? To what extent is access to more information necessarily continuing to support that notion? And so as a psychologist, what I look at oftentimes is how individuals are able to handle a mass amount of information. And eventually it overloads the brain. The very natural tendency, the necessary tendency, is, I call it horse blinders, right?
Yeah, narrow it down.
You've got to narrow it down, right?
Yeah.
Because it's actually uncomfortable. It's anxiety provoking. And so we've walked ourselves into this great space of opportunity with the challenge of having to make decisions almost with too much information. And I think we've seen some tendencies of people to say, let me narrow it down. But in doing so, have also lost the benefit of some of these adventuresome, creative thoughts and moving forward. So how is it that we encourage people, and how do we do that, probably at the K-12 and into the collegiate space, help individuals to curate information, make it more digestible and understandable, and then useful without falling into the trap of, I have a single data point, I'm going to use to color everything I'm thinking because it's as much as I can handle right now. It's a skill.
I think you're pointing to an area of thought, an area of work that is still very much under development. Because if there's lots of information out there and you can't possibly look at it or absorb it all, then you're going to be selective. And what has happened just in the last couple of years especially is we now have social media feeds as well as the standard broadcasts that are going after a segment of the population and intentionally developing programming, sometimes under the guise of news, but actually it's entertainment, just to keep that segment of the audience locked into their channel. And I think we as citizens have to be careful about that, because if we get locked into that one channel, part of what you're hearing actually isn't even information, or at least not very valuable information, and you have to get out of that mode and again start thinking sideways.
Right.
And I think if we go too far in the directions we've seen the last couple of years, it's actually dangerous to the nation. I think it's dangerous to democracy. I think in the earlier years, we're probably going to have to actually start talking about truth and science and evidence and developing skills in recognizing truth and recognizing what is evidence and the fact that we need to insist on evidence and not just making stuff up. And this conversation could go a long way in this direction, but it's kind of interesting. When I was a child, it never would have occurred to me that we would need to think about those kinds of things in the school system, because you came out of your family upbringing insisting on those kinds of things.
Right.
And now, hey, there's all this stuff out there. You can choose anything you want. You can live in your own echo chamber. You can pretend like that's reality. You can make your own reality. And I'll admit, I'll be the first one to admit, it's getting a little bit crazy.
It is definitely getting a little intense to to be able to figure out how to untangle all of this. I remember I was in the government. It was early in my tenure there, and I was talking to an individual from the Department of Ed, and I said, this is going to become a very serious problem, and it is our job as the education people to help facilitate and create that base for everybody to determine truth, to understand data, to be able to determine what is the information we need and what is the information we need to discard. I feel strongly that it's not about making the decision for someone else. And that's not the position we take. It's not one side or the other. It's nothing political. It is honestly helping people to make those decisions and choices. But it's not a course in education.
Right. That's true. That's true.
Not something.
It didn't used to have to be a course.
No, and so that's a big change.
Yeah.
Is to do that. Are you seeing that change on the campus space, or is it that filtering who comes in means that it's not so much an issue here?
I think it's less of an issue here. We have I would characterize them, at least for a technical school, as being a pretty activist student body, but activist in a positive sense of the word.
Sure.
They're very aware of the world. They're aware of what's happening in the world. They care about what's happening in the world. They want to make changes in the world. And so I don't worry about it so much among our student body. But, for the general population, I worry about it a lot.
Yeah. So I think the question is, how do we help that trickle down and outward?
Well, that's a good question. Can universities help? Perhaps they can in the sense of education and involvement in K through 12. But another thing is, I think we're going to have automated systems, maybe AI systems, that help us with this. Help us manage this problem. Technology has helped create the problem, and I think we need some research, more research on how technology can help solve the problem.
I think that is an exclamation point at the end of that statement, and interestingly well suited for this school.
Yeah, well, I hope so.
Right? It definitely
hope
fits.
So.
So to tie a bow around this, as we think forward, I know one of the things that we've talked about previously, and I'm certainly passionate about, is this recognition that education is going to have to evolve for all the reasons we've just discussed. But the challenge is less in what's the ultimate goal and more in what are the steps to get there. So in your mind, if we could narrow down the first three, we're not going to be able to plan out the entire pathway because it will also edit as time moves. But if there were three things that we as a society could start thinking about across the lifetime of education, what might those three first steps look like?
I think one step, it would be obvious, I would say this at a school that is oriented towards science and technology, but I think we need some base level of literacy among the general population about science and technology and the future and where things are headed. And I feel like many of our youngsters that go through the school system receive that, but a lot of them don't. And those folks that don't are really likely to be left out in a variety of ways. And it doesn't mean that everybody needs to be a computer scientist or an engineer or whatever. That's not the point. The point is to be aware and have some understanding. A second thing I would probably mention, and you won't expect me to say this, is I think we are tremendously undervaluing the humanities and the social sciences. And so at this institution, we are working hard at building our humanities and social sciences. If you think about who you would consult to help you predict the future, or who you would consult to help you understand what the implications of a new technology might be, sure, you would have some technologists in the room, but I think you would also have some psychologists and political scientists and others, historians for sure. Because if you want to predict that future, you have to know where you've been in the past. You have to know how changes in the past change the course of that history. And if I want to predict the future, I want to talk to people that understand humans. And so I think that the social sciences and humanities are incredibly important for our future for that reason, as well as just the contributions to a well-rounded life. And so I think what probably needs to be done is, and we're working on this at RIT, is offering a little different version, maybe of an English degree or a history degree, where that student that wants to study, say, one of those topics in the humanities, they can do that. But we'll also ask that student to take maybe a couple of courses in computing, or maybe a course in business, some things that will add skills to their toolbox and add to their well-roundedness. But we are not talking about, well, let's just shift everything to the STEM disciplines, or even to STEM plus the arts. We think that is too narrow, and that's craziness. And golly, if there was a third thing I would talk about, and we work hard on this at RIT, and I think on every campus, it really has to do with promoting an inclusive environment for our students, where students from all walks of life and all economic strata, all races, can really come together and talk about and experience really substantive issues. And so at the best universities, the student body is not engaged in a transactional way where they pay money for tuition, they get their education, they get a diploma, and see ya, bye-bye. But rather, they become part of a community, and their experiences were so important to their growth that they are part of that community for life. And I think at the best universities, that's what happens. And we fully intend to be one of those universities.
I love it. Those are three actionable steps that we can
hope
take.
So.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, we hope so. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
this
you,
was such a
Yeah,
pleasure.
thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining us.